Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Freeform Friday that will be recorded as of today, Monday, August the 26th. So, right around this time, of course, we're hopefully going to get Eric Watts on as our guest. Let's hope that that is going to happen. However, there is something that I wanted to discuss. Of course, breaking news. I'm not really sure if this story is true or if, in fact, it has happened. But I was told about half an hour advised, about half an hour ago, the wrestling world has lost yet another legend in his own right. Sadly, I was advised that one Eudy, better known as Lord Humongous, Sycho Sid Vicious, Sid Justice, or just plain and simply Sid, passed away at the age of 63. Here's what we know so far. As per the Daily Mail, if for some reason I'm able to do this. So, Sid Eudy, WWE legend known as Sycho Sid, tragically passed away at the age of 63 after battling cancer for years. And Sid had been battling cancer before he passed away. And fans flooded social media after the news broke. And that's much as what we know at this time. So we are waiting. We're waiting for Alan to get on the program. And we're also waiting to see if Eric Watts is able to come. So we have quite a lengthy interview and a good portion of questions. And also want to pay tribute to Sid Eudy. Of course, I never actually met Sid in person. I have many of his collectibles, and I also have many of his autographs, but I never got the opportunity to meet the man in person myself. Sadly. Of course, the news broke when Sid's son Gunnar posted on Facebook, "Dear friends and family, I am deeply saddened to share that my father Sid Eudy passed away after battling cancer for several years. He was a man of strength, kindness, and love, and his presence will be greatly missed. We appreciate your thoughts and prayers as we grieve this loss. Details for a memorial service will be shared soon. Thank you for your support." Of course, Sid competed in WCW and the WWF, standing at a massive 6'9". He established a memorable legacy as a 6-time world champion, including twice in the WWF. Of course, Sid began his career, of course, in Memphis, but also in WCW before making the switch over to the WWF. The WWE's official website writes that, if not for a leg injury in 2001, Sid's successes would have likely stacked up against the best in WWE history. At this time, tributes pour in for the beloved wrestler, with Eudy's former colleague Mark Marrow penning and touching tribute on X, or Twitter. So sad to hear that friend and wrestling superstar Sid Eudy has passed away at 63 years young from cancer. He was one of the first wrestlers I wrestled, and when I was trying out for WCW, what a great guy. My heart, thoughts, and prayers go out to his family, friends, and his millions of fans. And fans also offered some kind words, including the former wrestling star. Rest in peace to a legend who doesn't get enough credit in the business, one said. My childhood heroes are dying and it hurts, added another. He left this world by still fighting, a different well wisher wrote. I remember his fight with Shawn Michaels and will always be missed. Rest in peace, Sid, and may your memory be a blessing. Alan, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi there.
Sir, how are you?
I was okay until about half an hour ago or so. Learning this news has been most disturbing and kind of unexpected, and well, I guess in this industry, but still, I mean, such a huge name who's been everywhere, who's attracts buzz around the proverbial water cooler, who was the water cooler talk for a long time in the early '90s, and just in a little disbelief. I was very enthusiastic about what we're going to do this afternoon, and then this. So yeah, can you hear me? Am I muted? Can you hear me? Can't hear you. Oh, I see. Okay, so you've had a technical problem. So the joys of technology. Well, this is still recording. I think it is. All right, so I guess I'll start by sharing some memories of Sid. I don't know what else to do. I mean, what else? I mean, there's so much I can say. I've been watching Sid since around 1987 or so, when he was doing the Lord Humongous gimmick with the scary hockey mask. He's not the only one that did Lord Humongous, but he's the one that I first knew as Lord Humongous when I started watching, and he had Downtown Bruno by his side, who would later be his WWF manager, Harvey Whippleman. Longtime WWE employee, Harvey Whippleman, Bruno Lauer, and down to Lord Humongous was absolutely terrifying. I realized I was quite young at the time, but it was quite frightening. And he went on, he was doing running roughshod through Continental, and I seem to remember him going through just so many that he was every babyface in Alabama under the Fullers was not safe, and then he took off the mask and I think wound up in Memphis and where have you, and under Jerry Jarrett, and yeah, he God, there's so much from those days too. But of course, he first came to national prominence in the late spring of 1989 when Ted Turner had bought over World Championship Wrestling from Jim Crockett Promotions, and he entered the NWA as one half of the terrifying Skyscrapers, which was major, made a major impact. Just as the Twin Towers had made an impact, Big Boss Man and Akeem and the other company. In Titan Sports and WCW, NWA, you had the Skyscrapers, Dangerous Dan Spivey and Big Sid Vicious, managed by Teddy Long, who had just turned heel from refereeing. He went the Danny Davis route and became a heel manager. The Skyscrapers, well, I mean, they were pretty incredible and intimidating. A lot of people had big thoughts about them, and they were extremely big men. And even though Sid was kind of a lot less experience than Mr. Spivey. I mean, they definitely made an impression. Kind of a cult favorite at the time when you were stuck with the Ding Dongs and the Dynamic Dudes, and also great teams like the Samoan SWAT team and the Midnight Express and as such. And Skyscrapers, well, they blazed a quick trail that was very memorable, but unfortunately it was also very brief. Injuries would plague them later on. Sid, I believe, punctured his lung in a match with the Steiners and didn't quite make it to the Clash of the Champions in Troy, New York, the famous clash where Ric Flair and Terry Funk had their legendary I Quit match. Sid missed the show, and then soon enough, you have other people coming in to be Skyscrapers, and including the future Undertaker, Mark Calloway. And that was that. And then Sid sort of branched out a bit on his own. He took a break and he came back being introduced as one of the Four Horsemen in the spring of 1990. And this seemed to be new, probably, well, the only version of the Four Horsemen since the potentially greatest version of the Four Horsemen, which had disbanded when Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson basically left Jim Crockett Promotions and went to the WWF. And Sid helped form the New Horsemen with Barry Windham and Ric Flair and Arn Anderson at that time. And they were soon to battle the Dudes with Attitudes, which were Sting's squadron of merry men who were taken up for Sting. Sting, of course, had suffered that, just like Sid, had suffered a really terrible injury, the ruptured patella tendon. Oh, there's David. Okay.
Yeah, my apologies, guys. I'm really sorry. My laptop for some reason crashed, but thank you, Alan, for taking control and taking charge.
Oh, no problem. When laptops get power bombed, Alan's here. So they do.
Well,
And
that's for sure.
oh, are you still there?
Hold on. Yeah, I'm still here. It's just I have to change the camera.
All right. The eye in the sky is watching you, brother.
Well, yeah, of course.
I was just talking about how I'm at the point in Sid's career when he became a member of the Four Horsemen in the spring of 1990 and was battling Sting's Dudes with Attitudes. Sting tried to make it back from a worse injury than Sid had the previous fall, his ruptured patella tendon when he was climbing the cage at Clash of the Champions 10. And Sid was a big linchpin in the Horsemen, and they got the idea then, especially Jim Hurt, that he was going to have a chance at the top. And I think, at that point, who was mostly booking then? I guess it was Ole Anderson, and Hurd was in charge. And this is before Dusty Rhodes came back. And Sid basically worked his way from, at the Great American Bash, of course, the Horsemen, they lost the world title when Sting made a triumphant return, but Sid was in the lower card, sort of dealing with the other dudes with attitudes and all that. And eventually, though, he was moved into a prime position by Halloween Havoc to go to be the designated, his first, as far as I remember, his first ever main eventing a pay-per-view. And it was a pretty infamous pay-per-view at that, because that's the pay-per-view where the Sid was actually told he was going to win, and he went into the match believing that he was about to win his first major world heavyweight championship, and instead the office had other plans, and turns out that Sting had a double at that time, not like in the NWO days later on, but Barry Windham had dressed up as Sting with the face paint, and Sting, the real Sting, was kidnapped in the back by the Horsemen, and blah blah blah. So they did this whole thing, and Sid pins Windham, who's dressed up as Sting, and the Horsemen are ready to celebrate, but Sting breaks free from the back, and next thing you know, Sting is telling him, or the ref is like, Stinger splash, and Sid's looking at them like, well, he already won the match title, but no, apparently he didn't win the match. They figured out there was an imposter Sting, and even Sid wasn't in on it, really, according to him. And then he lost to Sting, and that was his last shot in that company as a as a main eventer. He was next widely known for Wrestle War '91 in Phoenix, Arizona. Wrestle War was War Games that year, and he did that infamous power bomb to Brian Pillman where he lifted him up so high that Brian crashed his face and his throat into the top of the cage. It was really gruesome to watch and was one of the better War Games there was. And so Sid once again wound up in the spotlight, maybe unintentionally this time, but his spring of 1991, things were starting to sour at WCW. I don't know if Jim Herd had enough or just he did have heat in the back, of course, and he was. I mean, Ric Flair had not the kindest things to say about him for many years, up until maybe the most recent years, and so Sid was starting to look for greener pastures, and the real straw that broke the camel's back was when they asked him to put over El Gigante, the late Jorge Gonzalez, in a stretcher match at Super Brawl. And Sid was like, "Oh, I can't believe this." And I think they wanted him to lose in like a minute and a half or something. And he did do that. But he left WCW behind him after that point. And so his infamous, sad last match at that run in WCW, when the world might have been his on a platter with skyscrapers or alone, instead he wound up losing to El Gigante in a stretcher match in about like a minute and a half. Pretty humiliating, but again, on the way out, So he left on July 8th, 1991, when the WWF was doing TV tapings in Western Canada. He was all ready for his big debut up in the New York, as they call it, the New York territory, quote unquote. And he had a dark match with Ted DiBiase at that point, and they rebranded him Sid Justice. And they decided to go a whole new route, make him a baby face, which he was not really comfortable with at that time. And it worked out pretty well in some ways for a few months. I mean, he did get a lot of main events, but mostly also, no, he got some main events, but his opponent, I think the whole idea was how did it work again? Was he supposed to face him and Jake Roberts had an alliance at that time at SummerSlam '91, of course. No, Sid. Sorry, Sid came to the rescue of Randy Savage at his quote unquote kayfabe wedding, and then Sid basically was scheduled to face Jake quite a bit, but Jake missed a bunch of those matches, and Randy Savage came out of retirement under a hood as Mr. Madness in a lot of those. The Montreal Forum had one such match in October of 1991. And on to the Survivor Series '91, where Sid was not on top, but he was featured in a prominent match. And then they were working their way to the big Royal Rumble in Albany, New York, where the winner would have the biggest honor of all time by winning the world title, because for the second time in its history, basically, unless you count the formation of WWF in 1963, the belt had been vacated. So Sid entered the Royal Rumble, and the problem is that Hulk Hogan was supposed to be a friend of his, but of course his subtle, not so subtle heel turn began at that point, and him and Hogan had a confrontation at the Rumble, and then a couple days later, when they were doing Saturday night's main event, Sid and Hogan were teaming up, but it was not to be because Sid turned heel, went back to what he's most comfortable with as in terms of his character, and he turned on Hogan. And next thing you know, they canceled Hogan versus Flair at WrestleMania 8 for other reasons. And they were going to go with Sid versus Hogan. Sid was going to get his first WrestleMania main event, and it was going to be huge, except for the fact that the steroid scandal and the Ring Boy scandals kind of exploded very big at the time. So there were a lot of distracted people, and so instead of Hogan versus Flair, Savage went against Flair for the title, and Ric Flair, who had his glorious win at Royal Rumble '92, which some people still talk about to this day. and Sid went on to battle Hogan, but there was a lot of speculation if Hogan was going to retire at that point. So a lot of the luster wasn't really there. And some people even questioned the insiders whether Sid had what it took to carry a WrestleMania main event. It was a weird time, but they still managed to draw a huge crowd to the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis for the Sid and Hogan match. And it wasn't a classic by any means. And then there was a big run in after that was supposed to help reintroduce the Ultimate Warrior. And they did do that, but there was a botch with the timing and Papa Shango and this, that, and the other. And Papa Shango was late for the run in, and whether it was the Gorilla's fault in the back or whether it was whatever it was. And so, yeah, the limelight wasn't totally on Sid, but Sid was supposed to go on to better things because Hulk Hogan was leaving and they weren't sure if he was going to be back or not, or he made it seem like it would. Nobody was that sure. So Sid was about to move into a feud on the main events and the house shows with the Ultimate Warrior, and there was a certain amount of excitement to it, except for the fact that it was stated that both were not exactly very crisp, smooth wrestlers, but what the hell, it's a pretty big draw, the idea of that. But they only had a couple matches, and Sid was really fed up with the way things were going. His initial run wasn't going to his taste, and basically he bolted. So that feud got kiboshed right away, and Warrior moved into a series with Papa Shango, and Sid basically went back to the sidelines and did this and that. And next thing you know, he pops up under the guise of Colonel Parker, Robert Fuller in WCW for Slamboree 93, and does away with Van Hammer incredibly quickly. And then starts his infamous 1993 WCW run, which saw the debut of the Shockmaster, which is, of course, legendary these days. And you had the War Games again. This time Sid was with Harlem Heat, and they were going to go against Sting, Davey Boy Smith, and the Shockmaster, and I don't even remember who the fourth was now. It was Sting, Davey Boy, Shockmaster, and whoever. But anyway, so everything got messed up, and WCW was going through some really hard times. Eric Bischoff was taking over, and so Sid, he was involved indirectly in the Shockmaster disaster, but the real disaster of sorts was to come when, during a tour of England, he got into a horrible, horrible situation with Arn Anderson when at the hotel, not even in the arena, where both were apparently under the influence and things got very much out of hand. I think Sid was insulting Flair and talking about how he's too old and over the hill to be the main focus of the company, and Arn was defending him, and both being inebriated, things got out of hand, and there were chairs swinging and stabbing with scissors, and it was really horrible. And Sid was slated for another run at the top. He was supposed to wrestle Vader that year during Vader's hot run for the WCW World Title, and that did not happen because Sid was fired after that. Arn didn't really get punished. Arn was in worse shape than Sid after that horrendous incident, but everybody pretty much loved and cherished Arn. But unfortunately for Sid, he only had a certain number of allies behind him, and he left. So he went to the sidelines again and worked, I guess, some regionals. Living in the area of the country he did, he could wrestle in Memphis, and then allegedly play his favorite game, softball, when the season was right, and this and that. But eventually the WWF came calling for another run, and this was at the time when Shawn Michaels and Kevin Nash had broken up their friendship, and Kevin Nash turned babyface and won the world title, and Shawn, they wanted to even the odds a bit, and next thing you know, Sid is back in the WWF as Shawn's bodyguard, and looks pretty amazing, and this was set up the WrestleMania 11 co-main event alongside Lawrence Taylor and Bam Bam Bigelow, and Sid became a vaunted member of the Million Dollar Corporation at that time, and Bam Bam Bigelow was ousted, and so there was Sid. once again, and except he wound up breaking loose from Shawn Michaels before the corporation thing. And he actually managed to turn Shawn babyface the day after WrestleMania on Monday Night Raw. And then Nash and Michaels reunited as babyfaces, and Sid then went on to be the crown jewel of the aforementioned $1 million corporation, and wound up feuding with Kevin Nash in the now infamous, rather, first two main events of the first two In Your House pay-per-views, which were the abbreviated pay-per-views that were shorter, cheaper. They gave away a house the first time. Unfortunately, they also gave away for $14.95 Diesel versus Sid as the main event, and it did not go very well.
No, it
They
didn't.
came. No, it didn't.
No, it didn't.
No, but I guess the blame is all around. I mean, they had very few heels to pick from for Kevin Nash at that point, and Shawn was, on the road, I guess, to working his way toward the Intercontinental title, and Diesel and Shawn were both baby faces again, so that wasn't feasible, and et cetera, et cetera. Bret Hart, of course, was another baby face, so that they lacked heels, like, really big time. So they tried again with Sid and Diesel at In Your House 2, this time in a lumberjack match. I don't know if it was any better. I mean, I guess it probably couldn't be worse than what you got for the first In Your House. But needless to say, Shawn Michaels and Jeff Jarrett stole the show that night, not surprisingly. And then Sid just went around that fall, battling Shawn Michaels several times. He battled, many different people. And then he started that team with, I think, was it 1-2-3 Kid, who was starting to turn heel. And I remember they were battling Marty Jannetty and all these people. And but Sid, I guess, was kind of sliding down the ladder a bit. And it was obvious for a little while that was the case. But then I mean, the next year things would change a lot, because he would wound up leaving again in early '96. But when the Ultimate Warrior returned and then left again, they begged Sid to come back and fill Warrior's place. So all of a sudden, Sid is getting a hot run as a babyface and teaming with Shawn now, not Shawn's enemy. And they would do a lot with Sid during that summer, and they convinced Sid to stick around when he wasn't sure he wanted to, but he did. And lo and behold, that year he won, as I recall, he won the world title at the Survivor Series, right, in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. He
Yeah,
won the title. And of course, because we all know the story, the reason that Sid was brought in is because Shawn liked working with Sid, because the original plan was for Vader to win the title at Madison Square Garden, and then Shawn would get it back at the Royal Rumble in San Antonio.
right.
But then when Leon was a little too stiff with Shawn, and Shawn threw the temper tantrum that he did, those plans were squashed, and enter Sid.
Enter
And
Sid. He was.
it's funny because Sid got a huge pop in Madison Square Garden, and Shawn got booed out of the building.
Yeah, that's right. It was supposed to be the opposite, right? Because Shawn was the face and Sid was the heel. But they love Sid and we're getting tired of Shawn's ways, I guess, or what have you, especially in the Northeast, right? So, yeah. And then, of course, they had that, I think they had the pay-per-view In Your House after that was Brett versus Sid. Was that what it was?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
time.
Right, right. And that was actually surprisingly good, but not so surprising because Bret Hart was involved in it. I seem to remember that being pretty good. And then you're starting to get into the early '97 stuff where Sid would soon find himself in another WrestleMania main event. But they had the Sid Shawn rematch at the Royal Rumble, right, in San Antonio.
Yeah, that was when Shawn regained the belt.
Yeah.
And of course, Shawn would end up dropping the title or forfeiting the title because he lost his smile.
Oh, of course. Yes.
And then,
How
of
could I
course,
forget?
we would go to In Your House Final Four. Of course, we covered that in the archives. back when we
Yeah.
were doing it at all on all kinds of different platforms. So we covered that, and of course, Bret Hart would get the WWF title in the at In Your House Final Four. Of course, only dropping it back to Sid the next night on Raw, if I'm not mistaken, or shortly thereafter.
Yeah, sounds right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that Final Four main event was very highly regarded, actually. So,
Mm-hmm. And of course, Sid would end up defending the
can you
title
hear me?
against The Undertaker in
Oh,
the main event at WrestleMania 13. And, you know, I've made jokes about what allegedly may have happened in the ring and maybe Sid allegedly soiling his tights. Of course, we're not going to laugh at that now, but it's apparently a
no, and
well-known
he
fact.
denied it. Well, he denies it, but he did deny it when he was alive. But yeah, no, it's a story that's gone around for sure. But I wouldn't blame him though if he intentionally repressed it from his mind if it did happen. It's not exactly the most flattering story, but it's kind of ironic though when you think about it. I mean, he gets two WrestleMania events against two of the biggest people in the industry, and they were both kind of like for various reasons, out of his control because of Shawn losing his smile and Hogan possibly retiring and the scandals that coming out at that time. It kind of took the shine off of what Sid was doing. I mean, isn't that a wrestler's dream to main event WrestleMania? So
Well, of
it's too
course,
bad.
of course. And I mean, I also think the only reason Sid and Hogan happened was because Vince was angry at Hulk for going back to the Arsenio Hall show, not answering the question and skirting around, giving an answer that he thought was the best way to go around it, but not answer the question. So it was Vince's way of, I don't want to say punishing him, but then he needed to take a hiatus. And of course, the original plan was for Hogan
Yeah.
versus Ric Flair. And of course, that never came to fruition, even though there were matches at house shows that were standing room only, but also in the South, they weren't drawing, especially in Atlanta, Georgia.
Well, at that point, they hadn't ever really drawn there, but you're right. Even their hometown hero Flair, going back to the South, was the home regional hero that didn't do it. But I thought I seemed to recall it was more because. Now, yes, you're right. I'm sure Vince did want to punish Hogan anyway for Arsenio Hall and all that. But I thought it was also more because that should have been the most blockbuster WrestleMania main event since Hogan and Andre, but they could see from the tepid reaction it was getting at the house shows that maybe that wasn't the way to go because people's expectations might be high, but the chemistry wasn't what they thought it would be, and the reactions weren't as amazing. I thought that's also why they changed. Now, I'm not saying they went perhaps the better route, but I don't know if they were planning to save that for another time. But Hogan wasn't even there after that. But I thought it had something to do with they saw that it wasn't going to be the one of the most stellar matchups of all time to and in any case, and for sure, the main event of WrestleMania, unfortunately, but not that Hogan versus. Actually, I guess you're right too. Then maybe Hogan versus Sid might have been a backhanded punishment or something, because obviously Hogan versus Sid is not going to draw the interest or the potential excitement that Hogan versus Flair would. I mean, so maybe it's both. I don't know. Maybe it's both. But yeah, too bad for Sid though. He seemed to, he was, a genuinely nice guy from everything that I've ever heard. I mean, he was a good-hearted soul. I mean, he might have been a little unusual or eccentric, to put it mildly, but he never meant any harm to anyone, I think. And for him to run back when he didn't really want to loyalty to Vince or whatever his reasons were, and so he was always there when they needed him, I guess you could say, because you couldn't count on the Ultimate Warrior for that. So
No.
uh, no. So I mean, after WrestleMania 13 in Chicago, or Rosemont. I don't know what happened after that. I'm drawing a blank.
Well, I mean,
I
Sid
mean,
would last with the WWF for a couple more months, and then eventually they would just
mm,
mutually part ways yet again.
Right, right.
Softball
And then he,
season, whether it was softball season, but also Sid had told the story in a shoot interview that he loved dairy farming and he got involved in the agricultural industry too.
well, yeah, I mean, I guess that can be pretty appealing if you're into that. But of course, WCW would come calling for another run from Sid in the late '90s, and there he was on Monday Night Nitro, and, uh, doing pretty well for the most part, all things considered. And of course, he would later suffer one of the most horrific injuries ever seen on television. I know you know what I'm referring to, I'm sure.
That
And
still to this day, that is tough to watch.
yeah,
That is tough
and
to
it's
watch, and there's no way that Sid should have been told that he had to go to the top rope.
no, I mean, he didn't even, well, or whatever rope it was, he didn't want to. I mean, he apparently told them, I don't want to do that. And they said, you absolutely have to. So, being the good employee or good independent contractor that he was, or whatever classification it was for those WCW guys, no, definitely, I guess, independent contractors went ahead with it anyway and paid a terrible price and took a while to recover. And by the time he recovered, I mean, WCW was pretty much, no pun intended, on its last legs. And that was kind of the end of that company. And then he became a pretty well respected independent worker. He was getting older, and there was only one company left. ECW was gone, WCW was gone, and there he was working independence for many years after, and getting a fairly good reputation. I think I don't recall him having a negative one, but I'm always focused on, like, while you were recovering from your laptop crashes, talking about his run as part of the Skyscrapers, and of course the Reformed Horsemen, which was the arguably the best version of the '90s of the Horsemen, up until that had the most potential after the '88 version with Barry Windham, Blanchard, and Anderson, and Flair, and J.J. Dillon, and just all that stuff, which was, when the Skyscrapers came on the scene, people didn't most everybody didn't know who Sid was, and he was just so impressive the way he would maul a lot of the enhancement talent guys, and he was some legendary stuff that's available on the internet to see now about some of the crazy matches the Skyscrapers had. And they went against even all the big names. They went against the Road Warriors. They went against the Steiners. They went against the Midnight Express, I assume, at some point. They unfortunately the Dynamic Dudes as well. No, it was really something, and just that era, that summer of '89, was WCW NWA's chance at really rebuilding from a lot of the damage the previous year had done. And it was great, but it only lasted a short while. And Sid was a big part of that. So a lot of fond memories of Sid during that time, and very excited when he became Sid Justice. And was it Ole Anderson who gave him the Sid Vicious name, as I recall? Long before.
Uh, probably, but then again, they had some
I,
issues with calling him Sid Vicious because of the legendary punk rocker.
yeah.
That was one of the other
Right,
reasons
right. And
there
somebody, it was.
were issues with the name.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Not surprised. And I don't know if it was, maybe it was Dutch Mantel, or it was somebody who said to him, you're so vicious, that'd be a good name for you, Sid Vicious. And I think this was not long after the singer, the musician Sid Vicious had, not singer, but the musician Sid Vicious had passed away. It's only a year or two after that, and he, was a hot name still in the news, kind of, in a way. And so he went with it. And yeah, I'm sure there were some. Obviously, Vince McMahon wasn't going to keep that name. Never kept anyone's name in those days, but certainly not going to keep the name of a recently deceased celebrity. Those guys using the same name. So, but no, there was a lot of excitement and anticipation. And later on, in later years, he just grew into a very competent hand who looked great for the TV cameras. I mean, he had an unforgettable look. His interviews were supremely intense. He had tons of charisma. His ring work was, well, some people think it was underrated and it was quite good. A lot of people think it wasn't so good, but it almost didn't matter because Sid was, you just couldn't take your eyes off him. He was so magnetic and so interesting to watch. And just everything from the beads of perspiration on his face to his eyes looked like they were going to pop out of his head when he had a microphone in front of him, the infamous mic botches that are now quite available on, on the internet. And I know you remember a bunch of those, right? So,
Of course, of course I do. Like I remember when they were in a WWF setting, he was cutting a live pro. Sid was cutting a live promo, and then he says, "Oh wait, can we go do that again?" They're like, no, we're live.
yeah, he breaks character too, and he didn't even stay in character when he did that. He didn't realize, he actually just became a calm human being for a moment, and then Jim Ross says, "Sorry, pal, we're live." Yeah. And of course, the one about having half the brain that Nash and Hall do, or whatever. Remember that?
Oh, of course,
That was great,
of course,
and just the way Scott.
I remember that one.
That was beautiful. What was more beautiful is not just that Sid said it, but the camera was on Hall, like laughing his head off, instantly realizing what Sid had just done, and it actually fed into the story that Sid is this, clueless giant who's dangerous but not very smart, and just it was just hilarious. Just the timing was absolutely perfect, So it was, I mean, just so many great moments. It's hard to believe that a guy who survived all that in many years, and the family kept his illness quiet, I guess, and now this.
I had no idea.
No,
I
I
had no
never.
I had no idea because what happened was I ended up getting a DM from one of my friends sending me a link, and I just couldn't believe it. I was like, "What?" And he said, "Well, we don't really know if it's true. His son posted it on Facebook, and sometimes you don't."
Well, if his son posted.
But then all of a sudden, the news pours in, and when I see so many people are going with it, I mean, on YouTube, no one's really talking about it. Of course, there's a couple of YouTube channels that have already posted and paid tribute, but of course, Figure Four or Wrestling Observer hasn't said anything as of yet. And I mean,
Well, they need to.
as we're going live now, I mean,
Well,
a couple of people live and nobody's saying anything, not even. Speaking of big guys, one person I really personally can't stand is Ryan Reeves, Ryback. I'm surprised he hasn't said anything, or maybe he has, but I'm just not paying attention to it.
well, yeah, but I mean, if it's his son's legitimate account, then what was he going to do? Make up a story that his father's dead? I mean, that doesn't make
Well,
any sense. I mean, the
we
story.
don't know. We don't know nowadays. We don't know because sometimes people's accounts can
Oh,
get
you
hacked.
mean, yeah. Well, that's true, but that's a pretty weird thing to do to hack. Because, mind you, a crazy wrestling fan could do that. Yeah, I guess a non-wrestling fan would have no reason to. But yeah, no, you're right. I guess anything's possible. I have no reason to believe it's not true. But I will say that I did find it odd that Sid had really disappeared for a couple of years because before that he was still relatively not incredibly visible, but he'd pop up here and there. But it's just been nothing but silence from him for a couple of years, as far as I know, and then that's when I guess you kind of start to wonder, but just figure, well, maybe he's done, and he's pulled a Rick Martel. He's just gone off and doesn't really want to make appearances and doesn't want to. He had his time. He was happy with it, or hopefully happy. And I mean, yeah, I never knew. Of course, I didn't know this. If this is assuming this is true, and um, but yeah, it hits you right out of nowhere, I guess. I mean, not that wrestling deaths are new, but you kind of hope after there's a bunch of them, they'll slow down for a while. And 2023 was not kind in terms of the amount of amazing people we lost, and just hoping it calm. I mean, even this year, and I guess it just happens when it happens. And again, it's somebody who wasn't very old and was If things had been different, could have had a beautiful 20 something years of retired life, I guess. And maybe he would have had something to do with the wrestling industry, at least as some kind of, spokesperson for himself, even, whatever, whether it means conventions or whatever. And anyway, I'm just, if assuming this is true, I'm truly heartbroken. It's just such a legendary person in a way that was always there. If you were a late 80s or 90s fan, I mean, he was just always in one of the two companies pretty much. And you always hoped they were going to do something really right by him in a way. It was hard not to get behind him in a way. It was, whether he was a classic scientific technician or not, he didn't need to be because of his incredible look. And if not for that stabbing incident in England, I mean, maybe his career would have had a different trajectory. I don't know. I would imagine that, though. There would have been no Starrcade 93 main event between Flair and Vader. It would have been Sid and Vader if that incident hadn't happened, right?
Mm.
And who knows where, we'd be missing that chapter in Flair and Vader's career, especially Flair's, but who knows where Sid's career, had that not happened, what could have been for him. I don't know. We'll never know. But this is right before, of course, Hulk Hogan unfortunately came into WCW, which I went through a lot of bandages from kicking doors and a lot of box of Kleenexes at that point from crying. But there he came into WCW to ruin it. So
Yeah.
first to take.
On a side note, I don't know if you heard about Hogan's recent troubles.
Yeah, I've heard about a bunch of them. Maybe I missed the absolute latest, but yeah, I've heard a bit about his recent troubles. I mean, if you're talking about what I think you are.
Well, what went down last week in Florida, when Hogan was launching his new beer,
Yeah,
and the things he said about the Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris.
yeah, that was pretty bad. And he was also making fun of indigenous people. And it was horrible. I mean, it was just, I mean, like his son, he never learns. I mean, for his son to get arrested for another DUI after everything, and then for him to not learn from the Gawker scandal or whatever, and he's just like I don't know if he must have been hit in the head more times than I thought, because he doesn't have a lot of sense for the worst public relations nightmare. He went from like the gift of television networks like Dick Ebersol and NBC to now I don't know what he is now, but it's see, there's a guy that keeps living and let him have a long and healthy as possible life. But I mean, he keeps, it's like the ultimate, as my brother-in-law said, the ultimate fail when it comes to his personal life. You had the ultimate warrior, well, he's the ultimate fail. I mean, leave it to him to just give him enough rope. It's like crazy. So he's like, it's sad to say, but I wouldn't mind if he just went away already. Like, I mean, it's hard enough that there's not that many legends around, but from those days. But then you have someone like this who, I don't know how much more of him and Flair I can take. I mean, despite their incredible accomplishment, at least Flair's entertaining. I mean, it's sad to watch, but he can be very entertaining too. But Hogan, I don't find anything redeeming in his. I don't know. It's hard to believe it's the same guy. Of course, I said that about Vince McMahon too. It's hard to believe that the Vince of today is the same human being, and I potentially use that word loosely, that we used to know 30, 40 years ago. So maybe Hogan's been replaced by some kind of alien pod too. I don't know. So terrible. What's your take on it?
Oh, my take on it is just that it's like, here we go again. There's
Remember what Jesse? Yeah,
people with cameras, people with phones, and Hulk Hogan just doesn't understand. He just didn't learn his lesson from the last time after the whole Gawker video. I mean, this time Hulk Hogan can't blame it on Bubba the Love Sponge.
I heard him blame it on the beer though. He said,
Well,
"It must
yeah,
be."
he's got to blame it on someone or something else other than himself.
Well, that's true. I mean, Milli Vanilli tried to blame it on the rain. It didn't work out so well for them. But
No, it didn't.
I just remember, I'll never forget that interview where Jesse Ventura, this was like the early 2000s or whatever, and he said nothing is more embarrassing to him than watching Hogan and Flair just parade around thinking that they're still in their prime when they're obviously so incredibly far past it. And it would be okay if they kind of accepted it and were like ambassadors, and but instead they're like, they're acting way more immature than the young 25-year-olds today. And then that was 20 years ago, so just I don't know. It just makes me uncomfortable. It's hard to believe I idolized some of these people in one fashion or another at one time, or at least had such a huge amount of respect for the absolutely incredible life they've led, or the success they've achieved, the incredible, all the stuff on their mantle. They just did unforgettable things, but what are they doing? They're just tarnishing their legacy. They're making people like who know better kind of look away and not want us totally always celebrate some of their great accomplishments in the past because of who they've become or who they're becoming, or the fact that they have such blinders on, or they're surrounded by enablers, or I don't know what it is. But I would, I'm much more comfortable seeing, proper ambassadors to the sport that we know of, and who we've met in some cases, and just people who are so grateful for their successes and want to give back. But then I see, oh God, I just, I really feel badly for his children. I mean, I don't know, they're, not, well, maybe not for the son that screwed up again, but I mean, geez, I don't know about Father Knows Best or Hogan Knows Best, but yikes, there's a family I can honestly say I'm glad I'm not a part of. Uh,
Well,
wow.
Linda Hogan, Linda is probably happy she's not part of that anymore. She got a raw deal. She got a lot of money out of it.
Well, yeah, and she's a pretty controversial figure herself. I know she often sort of portrays herself as the victim, but I've definitely heard stories to the contrary too. I don't know. I don't even know, but I just can't believe that Hulk is the same guy who revolutionized the perception of pro wrestling and really helped take it from the small smoke-filled arenas to the Pontiac Silverdome and Sky Dome and all these places. And I don't know. I mean, he's very thankfully he's lasted, and he seems to be in relatively decent health physically anyway. But I don't know. I'm not interested in his beer. I'm not interested in his push. If his personal life, not really either. Honestly, he's just one of those people who won't go away, and certainly not his political views. I really don't care what he has to say about it, and I guess there are people that do. I don't. So it's at least someone like Sid who we're celebrating the memory of. I mean, he, aside from the mistakes he made in the industry, you didn't hear much about him causing trouble for people behind the scenes too much, except for, I mean, outside of wrestling. I mean, and granted, he wasn't as big a star as Hogan and Flair would. And do you remember that story Jim Cornette told, where he told Ole Anderson not Ole Anderson, Jim Hurd, that he's so not knowledgeable about the wrestling business. He said, "You'd rather have Sid Vicious on your roster, wouldn't you, than Arn Anderson?" And Jim Hurd said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You'd rather have Sid, who will draw you $1 million in one night, than Arn Anderson, who will draw you $1 million over 20 years, but do it consistently and deliver, constant payback because he's absolutely incredible. But you'd rather, because Sid looks good, you would rather him out there, because after you've seen him the first time, it may not be as interesting the second time, and what have you." But I mean, I'm not saying he was absolutely correct in that, but I just was thinking of that story. And yes, I mean, Sid had his hilarious stories, the squeegee story, which I didn't tell, and I don't think you mentioned it, and all
No,
that
no.
stuff. And
Well, the only thing I ever heard was well, I remember Mike Graham had told the story, but you can tell us about it. I mean, if no one's ever heard it before.
Well, I think it had happened. Now, there's two versions of the story. One is that it happened with Brian Pillman, and one where the late Mike Graham claimed it actually happened with him, even though Pillman may have been present. It was an occasion, I think, where both WWF and WCW were in the same area, and the wrestlers were staying at the same hotel. And Sid had already gone to the WWF by this point, and a bunch of the wrestlers happened to converge in a bar near the hotel, or maybe even at the hotel. I don't know. And so there was a mix, and Sid had not long before that come over from WCW, and he was bragging about how much better the WWF is, how their stars are so much better, how the company is so much better, and now he's going to be a megastar. And I think he may have had too much to drink. I don't know. And he was sort of putting down the, shall we say, some of the more diminutive WCW talent. And Pillman and Mike Graham were great for various reasons, but they didn't have the physical stature, of course, that Sid did. So Sid at one point may have bragged that he could whip either one of them or one of them in a fight. And he said, "Oh yeah, I'll take you up on that." And he said, "Let me go, let me go. I'm going to go get a weapon or something." And people thought he might go get a shovel or an axe, but he actually grabbed the only thing he could find or something, which was a squeegee for a car, and there a mop or something. I don't know. And then but I mean, it didn't actually come to blows, but it came pretty close. And then Sid was mocked after behind the scenes because they said just like as Sid is as good as he purports to be in the ring, the best he can do for a lethal weapon is a mop or a or a squeegee. And then luckily no violence actually erupted, but the story became legendary. And again, maybe like the scissors, again, alcohol may have been somewhat responsible, if not consumed responsibly. I don't know. But it was just a funny, one of the, and Pillman, of course, was one of the legendary, legitimately tough people who you didn't really want to mess with. He was a smaller guy, but he could fight better than a lot of bigger guys if he was confronted with a real fight. So a lot of people felt that if he had battled Pillman, maybe, and Graham too, that Graham or Pillman could have whipped him in a real fight. That Sid may have had the size and the intensity, but he was not really a fighter. He was a guy from a farming community, and it was a simple agricultural background, and may have done some scuffling, but not much fighting, and street fighting for sure. So it was also the irony that whether it was Pillman or Graham, that these two much smaller men could probably easily whip Sid Eudy in a fight had it come down to a legitimate fight. So that's why the story was kind of funny, and I can laugh about it. Just thankfully, no violence actually erupted. But as a story, though, assuming it's true, it's pretty funny. So
Well, yeah, and then even Mike Graham would tell the story that apparently fans already knew about it and they were chanting squeegee, squeegee, squeegee.
right. Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe there were a lot of observer readers, or maybe they were in a place like Philadelphia or New York where the smart fans were starting to take over. I don't know, or somebody from the bar blew the whistle to the local newspaper. I don't know. Yeah, it could have been, but but it's one of those legendary stories. Just like the Shockmaster will always follow Fred Ottman, the scissors incident with Sid and Arn, and this story and things like that will always follow Sid. And just unfortunately, it seems like Sid is no longer with us, unlike Arn and the Shockmaster and Fred Ottman. And I don't know, just stunned. I mean, assuming it's true. And yeah, and I guess it really hits you out of nowhere because, like you were saying earlier, we didn't know there was anything wrong, and it wasn't find out it wasn't even a sudden death. It was something that may have been known to be inevitable by the few people that knew. And it's also sad because again, his character in real life was that if you could adapt to his quirks, and you could, that he was actually a really genuinely good-hearted, nice guy who would always do what the promoter asked. He didn't put up huge fusses. He was kind of the antithesis of the Ultimate Warrior. Like, like a lot of his old bosses had very good things to say about him. And not just in the WWF and WCW, even in the regional territories. He was a good guy to have there, whether he was, even if he couldn't do a Hurricane Rana or whatever, he was, not that he should, but I just mean, even if his style was rather simplistic, his attributes were good enough, were very good, and the things he was very good at. And behind the scenes, he was odd, kind of, and he would take off if maybe he wasn't happy, but he was otherwise a very reasonable employee with not a huge ego in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of wrestling employers like that. I've heard some of his bosses say very good things about him, including and his colleagues too, of course. He didn't have a lot of enemies, let's put it that way. And even Ric Flair forgave him in later years. They talked, and Ric Flair always held it against him what happened between him and Arn in England, but they later patched it up. And yeah, so Sid was not one of those people that had a lot of enemies or whatever in the locker room. He was just well liked, I think, even if he was a bit different or whatever. But not a I heard actually Jim Cornette once said it well. Sid Vicious is as crazy as you could get, in terms of a person, but he's not a bad or mean person. He's a decent, genuine person, but he's out of his mind. that's what Jim Cornette said, kind of like that. So that's the impression I've heard. Like it probably, yeah, but at least he was a good-hearted person. He seemed to be a really good guy who people had good experiences with, mostly anyway. So,
Well, most
rest in
definitely.
peace.
Most definitely. And I mean, I was trying to find a couple things to show. I mean, this is the closest thing I could find, of course, that I have of Sid Vicious memorabilia, of course.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's nice. I still have his autograph from the WWF fan club days from '91. I was an official member of the WWF fan club, and you get a nice, huge Sid Justice autograph picture. So,
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it's a shock to me. It really is.
yeah, me
And
too.
I mean, today was supposed to be a completely different situation because, as I stated at the top when I first started recording before we went live, originally today was supposed to be slated for a one-on-one interview with Eric Watts, of course, the son of Cowboy Bill Watts, who was a big star in Mid-South Wrestling, the UWF, who was a star in WCW, and of course was a member of the tag team Techno Team 2000 in the WWF when his father was working for the company, had a brief cup of coffee. Sadly, Mr. Watts did not return my call, texts, or direct messages. We hope everything is okay, and we hope that maybe one day, sooner rather than later, we can find another time that works best for each and every one of us. And it's just, despite all the circumstances, I think that the the way to pivot, of course, was we call an audible and we pay tribute to none other than the master, and the ruler of the world, Sid Eudy.
Well, yeah, definitely. And to be honest, I mean, I was totally focused on Eric for days and days now, and just this news of Sid kind of blindsided me so much that it was hard in the last half an hour before we started recording to get back into Eric mode, because I was it's almost like I wanted just to pay tribute to Sid and get Eric's thoughts on Sid even. I don't know, just yeah, it's just like this was a very odd case of unfortunately fortuitous timing, and not in a good way, but yeah, because I mean my head was sort of swimming. I was focused on Eric for so long, for a week now, and this, and now just and hearing the Sid news, and then Eric couldn't make it, and I just so much I wanted to say about Sid upon learning that, and that's what we wound up doing.
Yeah, and thank you for grabbing the helm and taking over while I was dealing with my own journey into IT technological parts unknown.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's just a little east of West Memphis, Arkansas, where Sid was supposedly from. I know he was actually, I think, from Tennessee, but if I'm not mistaken, maybe, but they build, or West Virginia, maybe, I don't know, but they used to bill him as from West Memphis, Arkansas. But yeah, while you were gone, I was talking about Lord Humongous. I was talking about downtown Bruno, his future manager Harvey Whippleman, of course, the beginning of the talk about the skyscrapers and stuff he did in '88 too, and yeah, just well, no, you're very welcome, and I am going to miss Sid immeasurably, and I have all the memories and many of the matches, and may his family find solace. He was a great family man, from what I understand too.
Oh, he was a great family man. He really loved his family. He loved his kids. And again, you see,
Yeah,
going back to Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, Sid, just like
absolutely.
Jesse
Yeah.
Ventura, was married to the same woman. Unlike Rick and unlike Hulk, Sid was married to the same woman for many, many years.
He had dignity.
Exactly. Exactly. And I don't want to turn this into a thing where, oh, let's bash Hulk Hogan, let's
Wow.
bash Ric Flair. We're
Yeah,
here.
I
We're
didn't
here
even
to
know
pay
that.
tribute to Sid. That's really what we're here for.
What's that?
We're here to pay
Yeah.
tribute to
Yeah.
Sid.
Well, we
And
are. I mean, 2 hours ago, I didn't know I needed to, but here we are. Yeah.
and he was a good man. Sadly, never got the opportunity to meet him in person. But from what I understand, for those people that are within the wrestling communities that I'm a part of course, there are so many people that have paid tribute to him on social media. Of course, I'll read a couple of them. And sorry if I get a little choked up because it's it's really, really, of course, sad. Of course, a member of the WFM Wrestling Figures Montreal community, Patrick Despatie, pays tribute saying, Un autre qui vient de partir, repose en paix, big guy. And of course, Médéric Côté, who had the honor and privilege of meeting Sid, had said, Il a été mon premier idole à la lutte lorsque je me suis mis à vraiment regarder la lutte fin de 1996. C'est sa rivalité avec HBK, Shawn Michaels, qui m'a fait autant accrocher à la lutte. Même ensuite avec sa rivalité avec The Undertaker à WrestleMania 13. J'ai toujours été Team Sid. Repose en paix, Sid, the master and the ruler of the world.
Très bien écrit.
And of course, our friends over at LWA Live Wrestling Auctions also had some kind words to say in honor and memory of Sid. Of course, both JF, Leduc, Firestorm, and Joe McCausey did have the opportunity, and I'm sure more than one occasion, to have met Sid. And when I asked about what their recollections were way back when about how it was meeting Sid, they said he was nothing but a class act, a great man, and a very, very nice guy, very loving, caring person.
Yeah, they know. Absolutely.
A very good guy.
No,
And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't Sid have a high-profile match in here in Montreal against Pierre-Carl Ouellet on the independent scene, now that I remember?
That is something I would have to check. I mean, I know that Sid did briefly he had a very short-lived run in of course, in the Internet Wrestling Syndicate group
Yeah,
IWS.
yeah, that was it. I think so. Yeah,
But I'm going to have to check that and let you know if that did in fact happen.
yeah. Well,
'Cause-
the first time I ever saw him in Montreal, as I was saying, when he wrestled Mr. Madness, Randy Savage under a mask. I was so excited. It was the first time I was going to see him live, and boy, did the Montreal Forum on October 7th, 1991, become unglued at the babyface Sid Justice as people were oohing and awing of him as a heel when he was first a face. Pretty much for the first time in his career on any major level, he was. I remember the forum went absolutely bonkers. They'd never seen Sid before in Montreal, and neither had I. And I was just, you knew you were watching a star. Like, even at that stage, you knew you were watching a star. It
Mhm.
was, it was
And
something.
one of the other things I remember that I remember, of course, if you're watching, the WWE Network version of the 1992 Royal Rumble, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about. But if you deep dive and you find one of the original, whether it's the pay-per-view broadcasts, I'm sure it's even on the Coliseum home video release. But if you remember in the 92 Royal Rumble, when Hulk Hogan gets eliminated by Sid, the capacity crowd at the Knickerbocker Arena in Albany, New York actually cheer. Of course, recent versions were edited out, or of course it was replaced with canned booze. But if you were there and if you saw the original broadcast, it doesn't lie. It goes to show you where it shows you where the power lies.
Well, I saw the original broadcast, recorded live from satellite, and I've only seen the version where people cheer. So even though I was aware that this happened much later on, watch out, folks, when the winners of history tell their stories. I mean, they can tell it any way they want, I guess, especially with the technological capabilities. But no, I remember being shocked at that when people cheered when Hogan was pulled out. That was a big surprise. Well, to me, it was a surprise. It wasn't. I know a lot of people like Sid. I mean, but well, he was a face for 8 more days. It was only 8 days later that he officially became a heel by turning on Hogan in the Saturday night's main event tag match. I think against Ric Flair and the Undertaker, if I'm not mistaken. And
Yeah,
um,
yes, exactly.
and that's when I think didn't he destroy the barbershop? He's the one who destroyed
Yes,
Beefcake's
he did.
barbershop.
Yeah, he did a number on the barber shop, and he was covered in all like shaving cream and
That was fantastic. That was like, because Brutus was. You talk about the internet wrestling community. I mean, a lot of them did like Sid, but a lot of them did not like Brutus. So even though they may have had their sympathy for what happened to Brutus, like he was the antithesis of somebody the hardcore fans would cheer for. And there's Sid with like shaving cream all over. I don't think that was intentional. The set just blew up. And speaking of blowing up, something I didn't mention was the incredible main event of Beach Blast 93 and the infamous exploding boat movie they made with Sid and Vader, which I know you remember quite well.
oh, of
Uh,
course.
that was great. Sting and Davey. I mean, it was so horrible. It was great. It was one of the worst wastes of money that a wrestling company. They spent a $50,000 US and $1993 filming that for what? I mean, how many people were going to buy that pay per view anyway, or just because of that movie? And I think that was it. Was there a little person in that one? Was that one with a little
Yeah,
person? I think,
Cheatham.
yeah.
Cheatham.
Yeah, yeah. A vertically challenged individual. Looks. Oh, that was first time I saw that. I was like, I got to see that again to make sure I wasn't dreaming, and I actually saw that. I was like, can you imagine Robert Fuller, a guy who's run serious wrestling territories, leading, and then of course Harley Race, leading Vader, and Parker lead, like these two serious guys like Harley Race and Robert Fuller, and this is what they're kind of involved in, and they're probably wishing they could have jumped off that boat at any time. It was pretty crazy. And well, they did, I guess, get off the boat. But I wasn't, before it exploded, presumably. But poor Sid, they put him in stuff like that, and he just wound up on set when the Shockmaster thing happened.
Well, I will
Davy
say,
Boy's losing it; he can't keep kayfabe.
yeah, yeah. I will give Sid credit for this. He's the only one during the Shockmaster falling incident to not break character. He stayed in character,
That's right.
and for that, he deserves to be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
Well, for many other
yeah,
accolades
well, yeah.
than that, but I had to say that.
No, that's an excellent point, David. And honestly, of all the omissions that we don't understand from the Hall of Fame, I mean, we understand them politically, but, on the surface, a lot of people have been clamoring for Sid to get in for a while. And here again they go, and basically they waited till somebody passed away that they could have inducted while they were alive. And I think they're going to be phasing out these, I've heard. I mean, it's not what it used to be, these Hall of Fame things. And I think there isn't even going to be, now that Vince has gone too. The whole Hall of Fame idea is very shaky now, I think, in some ways. But from what I've heard, but yeah, there they missed the boat when they used to have the big ceremonies, and Sid would have been a great inductee. I realize, maybe politically he had his differences in the company, but yeah, exactly. I mean, he should have gotten an Academy Award and a Hall of Fame induction for that, and probably like danger pay too, and everything. So there was, exactly. And during the show, I mean, during the exploding boat thing, not the Shockmaster thing, that one Fred Ottman should have gotten danger pay for. But that was, you're right. That was great. I definitely remember that very clearly. That Sid did not break character at any time. Davy Boy's laughing and swearing. People are like, and you're right. Sid still remained that vicious ruler of the world that he was, even through that. That's what I mean, though, about being a great employee. He was totally focused on doing what he was hired to do. In a lot of ways, he really was an ideal company man, despite his eccentricities and his quirks and stuff. So, yeah, goes to show you. That's
Oh, most
memorable.
definitely.
And you're right.
Most
It's not only memorable for Ottman, it's memorable for Sid, too.
Of course, Sid would make one final appearance for the WWE several years ago, back when Heath Slater, if you remember, Heath Slater
Yeah.
was coming out and challenging legends. And of
Yes, I
course,
remember that.
one night he mistakenly called himself the master and the ruler of the world, only for Sid to come out and give him a power bomb. Although there's a lot of people that say in the IWC that Sid's one last return or brief run was less than stellar, or was poor,
Well,
ill received by the fans.
uh, well, I mean, look, that happens, I guess, the way history. Well, then again, there may have also been a lot of newer fans who didn't understand what he had done before by then, which is what a lot of late run guys and women risk if they come back a lot later. I mean, I don't know. I know Vader was in one of those comebacks too, and unfortunately, poor Bob Backlund was in one. And I don't know. Yeah, yeah. Okay, fair enough. I didn't see any of that really, but well, maybe he was, of a time, and a time that we loved so much, and the people who went to see him at conventions who have great things to say about him. He's of that generation. Maybe the fans of 10 years ago were not so. I think we can honestly say if you stuck around as a loyalist to WWE in the time that Heath Slater was doing that, you're probably not the same caliber of fan. I mean, there's a cross section or overlap, but let's face it, the modern WWE fan is a different animal, right? I mean, they like guys that are, doing crazy spots and all kinds of moves and using props. And Sid wasn't that kind of guy. So maybe they just couldn't appreciate, and maybe he had slowed down. I don't know. It's certainly feasible, but maybe it was just a different audience. And I don't know. Who knows?
No, who
But whatever.
knows?
Whatever.
I
Doesn't
mean,
diminish his legacy one iota.
oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I mean, could go. I mean, can go on and on and on, telling, reminiscing on the life and career of one Sid Eudy, because he had a humongous career. He really had a
No pun
humongous
intended.
career. No, well, pun intended.
Unintended, I guess. Pun
Pun
intended.
intended, whether he was humongous, vicious, or justice.
Oh,
Viciousness and justice was served.
in a way that the world is forever changed and ruled. So
And of course, I'm thinking about his family. I, they truly love their father, and
yeah,
of
rightfully.
course, his other son, Frank Eudy, was a house guest on two occasions on the CBS reality TV series Big Brother in 2012 and 2016, respectively.
Yeah, yeah, I remember. Well, I didn't remember the second time, but I do remember that first one. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, and of
No,
course, I remember that. I remember during one of the episodes, they went to West Memphis, the CBS went to West Memphis, Arkansas, and actually interviewed Sid.
well, that's what caught my interest. Yeah, yeah. Because normally I don't watch of that stuff, but I said, wait a minute, Sid, Vicious, Justice, Psycho Sid, Mister Eudy is going to be on Big Brother. I said, it's one of the few times I made sure I wanted to see what was going on because Sid was on there or was going to be on there.
So, of course, this is a very unique, very special episode that was supposed to be one thing, but it turned out to be another. Of course, at this time, we hope to continue bringing Freeform Friday to you via StreamYard. Of course, we're still on a hiatus, but we do plan on coming back in the fall with new content and more interesting topics and hopefully more guests. Of course, at this time, I did promise that I would bring this up and that I would talk about it. Of course, October the 5th, in Gatineau, Quebec, at the Slush Puppy Arena. Of course, you're going to have the Warlord and the Barbarian, the Powers of Pain, making an appearance. But not only that,
Fantastic.
of course, October the 19th, I will bring this up and I will mention this, of course. My friends at LWA Live Wrestling Auctions will be bringing, it's going to be a two-night, it's going to be, I would say it's going to be the Friday and the Saturday. So I'll go over what you can expect. So on Friday night, October 18th at 7 p.m., over at Bullseye, which is a bowling alley and a bar, which is located at 3655 Boulevard Tricentenaire in Montreal. Adam Baum will be doing an in person signing as well as taking pictures. Of course, it's a collaboration between LWA Live Wrestling Auctions and the Wrestle Rock podcast. And now there are a couple of packages that I do want to bring up. And of course, if you need further information or you wish to participate and purchase a VIP package, please do reach out to JF and Joe over at Live Wrestling Auctions. So the way it works is Of course, there's going to be a combo with a 8x10, an autograph poster, exclusive 11x11, and you'll have your special VIP uh, lanyard, your souvenir bag, and that's going to be $70. And plenty of those VIP packages are available. Should you wish to purchase your own, which I think you should, please reach out to JF and Joe over at Live Wrestling Auctions. And of course,
That's a
there will
moment.
be the virtual signing taking place the following day, October the 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And you can purchase for $25 each an 8x10, or get yourself three for a boom for 60. And that's what I have to say. I
Oh,
know
can I
it's
say something?
go ahead. Yes, please.
Well, that is a monumentally magnificent deal. You'll definitely want to get with the Bomb Squad and the LWA for that incredible weekend that's going to be happening in mid-October. And of course, with the Powers of Pain before that and Gatsino. And you just reminded me of two fun Sid matches that I'd almost forgotten about. One was Sid against the Warlord in the WWF, which when he was doing Sid Justice, I thought that was it was definitely an exciting visual to see Sid battle the Warlord. As for the quality of the match, well, you can decide that. The other one was, I think Sid was the opponent for Adam Bomb in one of the worst Clash of the Championship in a hilarious way. I'm not saying it insultingly. It's a classic now. I think it must be on YouTube or somewhere. Where I think when Adam Bomb was the Night Stalker and he was just a rookie, it was long before Adam Bomb, and he was still learning, like and he was still with Ox Baker on the AWA and. But he found his way to the WCW and had one of the worst Clash of the Champions matches ever with Sid, who didn't do great when he had to work with guys that were new and clumsy. And just if you have a chance, and I think I'm remembering this right, Sid and Warlord is kind of exciting, but check out Sid versus the Night Stalker. It was, if you can find it, it's kind of gone down in internet wrestling lore too. Is maybe not the most high profile. You must see TV moment, but it's out there. So Sid versus the Night Stalker. But how great is that going to be to have Adam Bomb live and in living color for the first time on his own in Montreal, doing that with the LWA? That's going to be the bomb. What else can you say?
Yeah, the bomb squad is going to be out in full force.
That's it. And all this has inspired me. I definitely want to watch some skyscrapers matches now. I want to see Sid and Warlord, and definitely Sid against the Night Stalker. Again, it's been a while, and I want to celebrate the memory of Sid Eudy, but also look to the future, because October, if you're a Quebecer, you got some great stuff coming your way, courtesy of the Gatineau people, courtesy of the LWA. There's some amazing stuff, so stay tuned.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think it's best we end this here. Of course, this has been quite the day. It's been a whirlwind of a day. And as I
Yeah.
said, this is not what I anticipated this interview to be, or this episode of Freeform Friday to be. Of course, things didn't
No.
go as planned, and we had to call an audible. And of
What an
course,
audible.
let's hope that let's hope that our guests that we were supposed to have will reschedule with us one day, and we can finally get the interview that we were anticipating to go down today. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be the case. And wherever you are, whenever you tune in, thank you all so much. And be sure, be sure to remember the master and the ruler of the world, whatever you choose to remember, he will always be a legend and a sure Hall of Famer. Rest in peace, Sid Eudy.
Rest in peace.
Thanks, everybody.